Hello, I want to welcome you to the Meacham interviews, and today we have Dara Wier from the University of Massachusetts. Dara, we usually start by having you read a poem and then go from there.
All right, it's good to be here, and thank you for having me. This first poem is called Capitalism. I think I'm going to read it because it's in honor of us having an election coming up. It makes me feel about as low as ASAP makes me feel. There are so many types of us, coming in various versions of ourselves. There is, for instance, one type whose bold sense of entitlement is bolstered by an unquestioned, innate sense of righteousness. It makes for heady combinations, therefore calling for constant comparison, something sometimes useful, other times blindingly obliterating, to beauty, grace, love, empathy, sympathy, insight, courage, humor, love, grace, humor, love, wit, foresight, generosity, love, humor, truth, empathy, grace, sympathy, empathy, sincerity, grace, truth, beauty, wit, courage, adventuresomeness, surprise, love, humor, empathy, kindness, withholding, judgment, love, humor, empathy, recklessness, generosity, love, humor, despair, understanding, love, humor, empathy, recklessness, love, humor, despair, loving kindness, love, humor, empathy, humor, joy, sympathy, love, kindness, courage, love, humor, empathy, sympathy.
Thank you. Well, that's most of the things that don't get talked about in the political scene. That must have been a lot of fun to write.
It was, and it's also a lot of fun to read because I can change it and add and take away kind of at will with that long, long list of things that come up. And I can add things that I didn't know I was going to add when I'm reading. And so that's kind of fun.
Yeah, in some ways it's a kind of an extension of things that you've been doing more recently with where your poems jump really quickly from one thing to another. It's kind of like a hypertext sort of motion.
Yeah. And in terms of why I wrote it or called it capitalism, I think I'd been listening to a lot of so-called Marxist critics among some of the people I was around for a while, and I was slightly amused by how funny it is to be a Marxist today. And also, though, when I started to write it, the title capitalism, I am referring to it when I say it makes me feel about as low as soon as possible makes me feel. I've always hated that ASAP thing because it's like somebody's throwing a snake into your life. Yeah. And it makes me creepy. But then I thought the accumulation of all the words at the end are related to the idea of accumulating in capitalism to work with and stuff like that. So that's kind of like a quick, easy way to explain that poem away.
Yeah, well, it's interesting with all those combinations of words, heady combinations, that you can, you were saying you could sometimes read it in a different way.
Yeah.
I think that's really fascinating. When you talk about that, I'm thinking back to your last book, You Good Thing, and you have that little sketch of Pessoas at the opening. And when I explain that book to my students, I start to talk to them about it. We talk about that quick change in perspective, the kind of associative thinking that you get, and you go along and you're not sure why you got to the third and fourth line, but when you get to the sixth or seventh, you realize how it echoes back and stuff like that.
Great.
Yeah,
that feels good.
What's your process when you write those? How do you begin, or is there a particular way that you begin, or usual way?
For the book you're talking about, You Good Thing, I wrote one poem that's in it quite a while ago, and sort of noticed that it was traditional sonnet length. And I thought, well, I fell in love with poetry partly because of reading sonnets, so I ought to pay my respects to that as a conventional, traditional thing. Even though I wasn't going to be abiding by all the rules, I was still going to at least participate in the length of it. So I started writing pieces that were that length, and realized after maybe 10, 15 poems how exhilarating it was to see the end coming.
Yeah.
And because of that length, seeing, and you know how when you write a poem that's unconventional form, and you can make it as long as you want, you really never have that bracing feeling of like, oh no, I got to get out of here. And that's a great feeling when you're seeing, oh no, there's 3 lines left, there's 2 lines left, what have I done? I've made myself, and it's not like painting yourself into a corner, because you've painted yourself into a space in which, in effect, you can almost do anything. It looks like you can't, but you can, and that's an exhilarating feeling, I think. So I like doing that, and I wrote this book with very particular sense of, well, I'd lost where I lived in New Orleans from Katrina. I'd lost some animals in my life. I was losing some people in my life. And so the poem addresses that idea explicitly over and over again, mainly by almost accusing whatever I lost or I was losing as hiding from me. So as a way of talking about loss, I was trying to make up things, you know, like one poem in the book is called Preemptive Grieving. Yeah. And, you know, little did I know that it would really be useless. I mean, I knew, but it was still like that. So this book was pretty much kind of atmospherically or tonally of trying to, well, not stand up to, because that's impossible, but acknowledge the presence of loss.
Yeah, there's a lot about loss. Well, a searching for the you,
exactly,
which is sometimes seems to be a person out there, or a thing out there, or inside here,
or a place,
and maybe combinations of those.
That's
and
right.
Maybe sometimes the speaker doesn't know exactly which is which.
That's right.
And I really like the way that works. It's so fluid. When you were putting the book together, how did you decide on a structure and arrangement?
I don't know exactly how many poems are in the book. Maybe 35, 40, something like that. I probably had written about 100. Oh. And I took advantage of my really wonderfully generous and talented daughter's
Emily,
skills at being an editor. Her name's Emily Pettit. She's a poet too. And I gave her the manuscript, and she whittled it down and gave it back to me. And I pretty much, it's kind of chronological, other than that. But we took stuff out all the way through. And she found the title.
Yeah, it's interesting you say chronological, because it sounds like a journey when you're reading through it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Right.
Do you want to, maybe you should read one from there.
Okay. I'll read the opening poem. It's called Not a Verbal Equivalent. You said one thing as a way of not saying something else. You wrote something so that other things wouldn't be written. You drew me a picture of one thing and not anything else. I'm trying to figure out how this applies to what you've gone and done, in case by doing so a solution to the problem we've been having no success solving makes itself evident. For the sake of argument, let's say I'm a crime and you're a clue, and someone else we don't know who is a detective. We're on the Wind River and it's twilight, and you have on your windbreaker of many pockets, and I have on my boots in which I hide whatever needs to be hidden. To be perfectly accurate, you're barefoot, and I have nothing to hide at the moment. Wild geese, 2 butterflies of blue and black geometry, a coal train, skid marks on the curve in the road that will point us slowly into a nearby cave.
Last year I used that book also in class, and one of my students said, "Oh, I get it. When she says, I'm trying to figure it out, we're supposed to be trying to figure it out." Said, because they were fooling around with the pronouns and everything. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly it. It's a way, I mean, what better thing for a poem to do than to pull the reader in like that into its own world?
Well, because you don't want to be by yourself in the poem.
Yeah.
Like when I want somebody else to be in the poem, it's because I don't want to be lonely in there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's
Okay.
great to talk to you.